Hi, my name is Peter Caranicas, and I'm an editor at Variety. And it's my pleasure this morning to have this conversation with Jay Cassidy. Hello, Jay. If you go to IMDb, Jay's first credit as a film editor goes back to 1973. Since then, he's cut more than 50 films, including documentaries and other projects. Major titles include Fury, Foxcatcher, American Hustle, Silver Linings Playbook, and Inconvenient Truth, and most recently, A Star is Born, directed by Bradley Cooper and starring Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga. And it's a film that's very much in the awards conversation this year. Jay would like to show a clip from that movie, and then we'll start the conversation after we see that.
So, first of all, thank you all for inviting me here. It's really a thrill. And Mike, yeah. No, that's right. Yeah, there's technology here. But thank you for inviting me here, and it's great honor to be here. I hope you guys probably saw the previous discussion here, which I watched too, which was wonderful. And I just wanted to say one thing, that in Star is Born, the Jack main character has to go out and perform at a pharmaceutical convention. So when I heard about her film about making the bullets over Broadway, or bathtubs over Broadway, I said, well, yeah, it's true. Somehow that filtered down to this movie. But to start, let's just look at, this is sort of a film clip from the film in that it came from the publicity department. So they can't help putting a little cell at the end of it. But let's run that.
Well, those are very intimate and beautiful scenes, but a lot of the footage, the material in this movie is concerts that are a lot of singing, a lot of music, a lot of venues around the world. And what I understand is that unlike many musicals where the performances are done to pre-recorded tracks, they're lip-synced. In this movie, they actually did the music live, and that's what they recorded, and that's what they used for the final track.
True, and what we should say is that the vocals are live. They would record a song in the studio and have a pre-recorded track and a click that would make it so that you could repeat it over and over again and stay in tempo. And but on the set of this movie, they recorded all of the musicians who were performing and the mics of the singer mics. They were all recorded discreetly, and the songs were reconstructed from those recordings. And if something was a problem, you could default back to a pre-recorded track if if the location was such that you had an issue. But what was it went back to Bradley and Lady Gaga's sort of her attitude was, I can't do lip sync well. So, and his attitude was, I'm in a character and I'm changing my voice pitch to be in this character, and it's a lot easier for me to be in character and sing the song and have it be, have it stay at the right pitch. So the result was that we went to great lengths to have that authenticity for the film, which none of you have seen, of course, and it doesn't come out for a week. So I can only tease you a little bit about it.
Well, I'm sure after this, a lot of these people will see the movie. How did the fact that the music is basically, the songs are basically live, how did it impact your work as an editor?
We had to take an approach at the very beginning of sparing you all the mechanical details of the location recorders would record and give us like a particular take of a song and it would have 40 tracks. And so we had to work out a way to cut that up for the various departments. And we had a music editor on from the beginning who worked creating mixes of the songs from the very first, we would do a cut, we'd send it over to him, and he would create a mix of the song because it was, there was just such an unwieldy amount of information. And some of those 40 tracks were like reverbs and crowd backgrounds and, all of the things that you needed to construct something that sounds real. And so there was sort of a mechanical element, and when we started the film, we realized, oh, this is not going to be the same as every other movie, and we must, so we came up with ways to accommodate.
How long did the editing take you on this movie?
On Stars Born was shot in September or April of 2017, and we finished the following April. And then, it was a movie where we finished well before the release. So we kept going back to little things in the movie. So, up till about a week ago, we were just changing little things.
Cutting it a little close,
yeah,
isn't it?
We shouldn't have, but never mind.
Yeah. So were you...
And didn't need to.
Were you on the set during production?
Not that much. You're on the set as much as you need to be to kind of to serve the production. And in certain cases, there were, today because of the internet, they can shoot something, it comes back over to us. If they need to have it cut, we can kind of rush to get it prepared and cut it real quickly and put it on some little link, and it's back at the set, middle of the day on the following day. So if there's something that needs to be looked up quickly, that can happen very fast. However, if you're in a place where there's no internet, which is even in Los Angeles, you find them, and you'd have to go over. And so you bring a little laptop, and it didn't happen very often, but there were certain things where, there were kind of risks taken on the set with the performance or with the, adjusting the story. And Bradley really wanted to see, he needed to see it in order to do what he was doing that day, and sort of confidence builder.
This session is called The Art of the Cut, so I want to get into some more basic facts and stories about the editing process itself. Jay, what made you become an editor? Was it the ambition you had as a kid, or did you kind of fall into it?
I don't know how many kids grow up and say, I want to be an editor. But what you work in the business, and you end up trying a lot of the different jobs, and then you fairly quickly discover that working on the set in a movie's hard work, and you have to get up early in the morning, and they're long days, and the only person who's really having fun is the director. Cameramen may be having fun. The actors are, depending on who they are and what the role is, may be having fun. But, it's an acquisition phase. And then you think about the writing, and you think, oh, the long hours alone, and your work is parsed over and chopped up and reinterpreted. And then you think about the editing, and it's the final word. You're making the movie. So I think for me, I gravitated toward it because it was, what I wanted to do with telling stories, that's where you were telling them. And that's where the story was being realized. And like the two guests before, I started doing documentaries like in the 70s. Some of them were for political campaigns, that was very interesting. For the McGovern campaign in 1972, I through the 70s and into the early 80s, and then I'd sort of every now and then go back to a documentary. And like it a lot, like the experience. You know, and you know, I should say, our previous guest stole my thunder because what they said is absolutely true. Is it's all storytelling. You know, between a narrative film and a documentary film, and a lot of the films that I think Dava was describing that are sort of hybrid. You know, the Errol Morris things. You know, it's all wonderful, and it is simply storytelling. And we you know, so if you're interested in that, it's very simple to go from form to form, and and delightful, and also it kind of inspires you in the other parts of your work on dramatic films. And so I don't look at them as oh, I'm going to do that, or oh, I'm going to do that. It's you look at it as, oh, this is a great story to tell, and this is the level of abstraction that we're telling it in.
Jay, can you take us through the process of how you start with a narrative film? Who do you get the call from? Is it an agent? Is it a director? Who do you meet first? What do you talk about?
Most things that have come my way of late are with people I've worked with, and the Bradley Cooper had been an actor in Silver Linings Playbook and American Hustle and Joy that David O. Russell directed, and Bradley was very interested in directing, and he had a very tight collaboration with David O. Russell. And David brought him into the cutting room, and he would say, "Okay, here, Bradley, you go and you do your cut of that. You know, you have an idea of a structural change. Let me see it." And so, we ended up working together on those films on chunks, and that just naturally extended into Star is Born. I mean, I heard about it early, and sort of tracked the progress as Bradley kind of evolved, and then the thing that really made the film viable was his discovery of Lady Gaga as a casting choice. And once he had that, it was a matter of then sort of reselling the idea to the studio, and what the studio did, and you got to give them a lot of credit, is they let us do about a year before the film was shot, we did a test of where we took a scene from the script as it existed way back then, and shot pretty with a lot of production value. We shot it at her house. This scene between the two of them as a sort of proof of concept. Can she carry a movie? They certainly were not worried about Bradley after his, knowing his acting chops, but they were rightly wondering about her, and it was good for us to say, okay, we got to prove it now, and it was good for her because she knew that this was not. That she was going into territory that she was not on secure ground with, that she hadn't been, and she wouldn't get the instant adulation that she might get as a Lady Gaga character, and so she really had to work, but she wanted it so much that the biggest thing an actor has to do is to just trust the director and trust the material, and she did, and it was, as a result, it was, the movie's not called A Star is Born for nothing.
When you read a script and at the outset of the start of working, do you have an idea in your mind of how you will shape the movie, or does that process occur during the production itself, and how much does it change from the original idea you have?
Well, it isn't so much my idea is the idea that a director is kind of it's his conceit, it's not my conceit, and in the case of Star is Born, Bradley had specific conceits. He said, all of the production numbers, all of the songs, the camera's going to be on stage with the performers, and the crowd is going to be just kind of a third presence, but no kind of cut to the crowd cheering, cut back to the performer, no angles from the crowd seeing them perform. Everything was shot on stage with the performers. And you'll sort of know what that, means more when you see the film. So there was a directorial intention. It was, oh, okay, I see. This makes sense. And so and it was done for a reason, and that reason was you wanted to stay in the heads of these two characters, and you wanted to experience what they were experiencing. So that completely dictated how the film was cut and shot and cut. And so, I mean, he, instead of, gathering all these thousands of people to do these concerts, you'd think they'd have, 10 cameras in 14 locations and cranes and this and that. And there wasn't. He shot it with 2 cameras, both of them handheld or Steadicam rigs. So very simply, and for full songs, not just for a little snippet, so that you're in a position where you're interpreting somebody else's ideas to begin with, and then there's a great moment that occurs when you've kind of taken the ideas that have come to the cutting room and you look at them, sort of in a straight through run for the first time, and you say, oh, okay, that's what we've done. And then you kind of, previous ideas are put aside and you really begin to tell the story with what you have.
This is the 4th Star is Born. The first one was 1937. Did you look at the earlier movies?
I didn't look at the Streisand one. I did look at the other two, and there's actually the early one too. That's with the other title, What Price Success or whatever it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But we looked at all those, and I mean, Judy Garland. It's still, I mean, it really stands up, and it's her performance, and Mason. It's remarkable.
Mason, yeah. I want to talk to you a little bit about your collaboration with directors. You've worked with many directors. They're all different from each other. What is that process like? Do they stand behind you in the editing room? Do they
with a riding crop?
do they give a lot of comments? Do they sort of guide you, or do you guide them?
Well, I mean, I like to think that the film is guiding everybody. And just as I spoke to the moment before, once you sort of have kind of executed ideas as they were sort of laid out in the script, there is that moment when you start to think, oh, we have to read this film a new way, because a script is a architectural drawing, and and when you get the film, you've now built the building, and the support beam that holds up that thing really should be over there to hold up that thing. So that process happens, and the directors that I've worked with recently, David and Bradley, just to name a couple, they understand that. And David on Silver Linings and American Hustle and Joy, he's his background and his orientation as a writer is he just looks at the editing as the final rewrite, and is constantly coming up with ways to either restructure or within a scene recut the lines and go record a off-camera line, and whatever it is, because he's in his head, he's rewriting the script again and again, and so that you're there, and there's a great if in the best cutting situations, there's a great spirit of experimentation, and all this digital technology, it means that you can experiment without any loss of previous work. It's the word processor versus the typewriter kind of analogy, so that it doesn't cost you anything or undo any work that you've done to try really radical experiments. And it's just your like when we finished A Star Is Born, were there more experiments you could have tried? If there were, we couldn't think of them. So were there more kinds of areas you wanted to go attend to? We had no feeling that the art had been abandoned along the way because we ran out of time. It was like, well, that's as smart as we are, put it up there.
Yeah, there are some directors, not very many, but a few, who cut their own films, like the Coen brothers, for example. Apparently Kurosawa also cut his films. Others get very involved, like James Cameron, Alfonso Cuarón.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Does it take a certain kind of skill for a director to do that?
I think every filmmaker is going to approach the process their own way, and if that's what they want to do, more power to them. And in the directors you mentioned, the work is justified. So they often they'll have somebody who's in editorial who is kind of assisting them, because it's hard to direct a movie and then cut it. You have to have a lot of time to do that, because it's it is a time is your best asset, is like the amount of time that you can really like look at dailies and absorb dailies, and in a sense you're for some reason, even when there isn't a rush, you feel a rush and you feel an urgency to kind of keep going fast. So I don't know those directors because I've never worked with them, but you look with the Coen brothers, they have a system that they've evolved, and it works for them.
And there's two of them, so they can split the time, I guess. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you about actors. I mean, you live with the images of these actors for months at a time. You see their faces closely. You see and edit their emotions. You see them have their clothes on sometimes. Do you feel like you have a certain kind of intimacy with them?
With a particular moment and a particular scene, you certainly do have a. But as people, I may or may not know them. So I like to just think, they're like, even with Bradley looking at his own self on the screen for 8 months, I never thought of that as him. I thought of it as the character, and you referred to him by character name, not Bradley, you're doing such and such in this shot. And that disassociation was really necessary for him, and he did it very quickly and very abruptly. And he had to keep his beard and his long hair for a couple months, because there was one of the concerts was a pre-scheduled concert at the Forum, and so we had to wait to shoot that. And then there's always the feeling, do we have to do a reshoot of something? And so he kept his beard and his hair, and then we went through a preview and this, and the day that he could cut it all was like, he was so thrilled, because it's the vestiges of that guy. He had lost the voice. He very quickly lost the voice, and I saw him recently. He said, I can't even do the voice anymore. And so that disassociation is really necessary when you're working with an actor-director.
Mm-hmm. I want to switch this over a little bit to technology, which has been hugely transformative in your profession.
Yes.
Everybody knows how in the old days it would physically cut film with scissors and paste the pieces together, and now it's all electronic and digital, and there's systems like Avid and Final Cut Pro, and you've been around long enough to have witnessed all these changes.
No, I lived through almost 3 of them. If I can give you a really quick I've thought about this a lot because, it's what you do. So you think about it and you maybe romanticize it and you think maybe in the course of history it's more important than it actually is. But if you go back when films began making, and you look at the Lumiere brothers, and they did one shot, and then you got to the very beginning of editing, and the editing was done on the original negative. They'd hold up the piece, and they sort of knew, okay, we could drop it in, and you'd have one chance to make your cut, and there was a moment in probably like 1908 or 1909 where somebody thought, well, we don't really have to cut the original negative. We can make a print and we can cut that and we can look at that, and if we like it, we can keep it, but if we don't like it, we can put it back, and we haven't wrecked the original negative. And that was the beginning of film editing, because you were able to make a creative choice of which you had a way back. And so from there, you had, within 10 years of that, you had the Russians doing what they were doing with montage, and you had very sophisticated storytelling, because you now had a craft that could allow, the analogy to film editing is often sculpture, is like and this analogy is, as you're sculpting down through the piece and you pull a piece of clay off and I've taken off too much, you can put the clay back on. So as long as the clay stays wet, you can keep going and making creative choices. So the first step is being able to make a work print of the original negative and chop that up. And so the clay stayed wet a little longer. The next great technological change didn't come until the late 50s and early 60s, when the splicers, and I think it really evolved in Europe, instead of physically chopping, you're cutting the work print now, instead of chopping the work print and then looking at your cut and reconstituting the piece, but the chopping destroyed a frame. So you had two choices at that point. You could cut in a black frame to keep the number of frames consistent, or you could reprint the shot from the original negative and continue cutting. That limitation went out the window when you could make a Mylar splice, where you could cut on the frame line and make a splice with essentially Scotch tape and undo it and put the original piece back. So this was the 60s, late 50s, 60s. So suddenly, filmmakers in the new wave, there was a shot of juice in the editing, because it was easier to do. And look at Bonnie and Clyde and in the 60s. All of that. The next big change was in the 90s, which is the digital editing, which was, as I said, the word processor kind of typewriter analogy, where your work, you didn't have to undo work to do new work. You could keep a copy. And so that evolution is enormously freeing. And I remember in the 90s, I had done film editing in the Mylar world for my whole career. And the second you could do the electronic editing, I think it was in 1994 that I started working with the Media Composer. It's like, okay, I get it. Something very primal says, oh, this is easier. The mechanics of the process are not holding back the art. And now we have, I don't know what the next big step will be, but the step in the early 90s with digital editing is enormously helpful for filmmaking, and it's also it sort of made the process more democratic and less based on a ritual of expertise. You know, in the old days, the editor was the only one who would make the cut on the work print that would then go to the splicing room at the studio to get spliced to look at. You know, it was because there was a cost applied to the every splice and every edit sort of costs something. And now it's like a few $100s you can buy a wonderful editing system. And so it's an amazing transformation that I've seen in my life, and it's liberating. And what it does is it puts the onus back on the filmmaker and says, okay, now you got a great tool, no problems there. You better come up with good stories, and you better figure out what those stories are and how to tell them.
I've heard the next big leap is going to be cloud editing, where a material lives out there in the ether somewhere, and you access it from everywhere.
I don't think that will be as creatively. I mean, I don't care where the material is. It can be in the next room, through a thing, in the cloud. But the tool, I mean, I think what I'm really, from my weird perspective of being stuck in rooms for 40 years, it's how you do the thing you do to accomplish the craft. And, I think I don't think it's just, sharing or that'll all be fine and helpful. And, we certainly, the sharing aspect of things is, we certainly take advantage of. But, what will it be? And, I don't know whether I'll be around to see it, because these are long, many decades of technological jumps.
Let's talk a little bit about editing 101, the basics of editing. Is editing for comedy different from editing for drama? How do you build suspense? How do you create tension?
I don't know how I do it. I mean, it's hard to articulate exactly what it is, but certainly comedy is often shot differently than sort of other things. And I think it's a little bit of an artifact from comedy being on television all those years. With David O. Russell, David O. Russell shoots his comedy as if it's as serious business as anything, with no differentiation between or no allowance for making a comedy moment. His view of comedy is it's born out of serious human behavior and the conflicts and results thereof. So, I mean, he's like, that's his orientation, and it's also been mine, which is why we've worked together and enjoyed working together on the couple of films. I think there's other kinds of comedy where there are other choices that are made directorially that are just different. And but in both cases, you're looking for the audience, and which is why the previewing is so important. You're looking for the audience to track and read the film as you intended. And so with comedies, especially, when you play it for an audience and you hear how they react to a joke, sometimes the very smallest editorial manipulations can affect that in a good way. And, you sort of learn to listen for those things. But even any other genre of film, you go to a preview and your previews are a little artificial, but they're all we got. But presumably you've also screened the film for your friends and kind of friends and family type things. But you're looking for, you're not necessarily looking for the audience to say, oh, it's the greatest movie in the world. That's they may say we really loved it. That's not helpful. What's helpful is to realize, oh, they read this beat incorrectly, and that affected how they sort of understood something. And it becomes, that's what I found really helpful with the previews, is kind of the little misreads and intentions that you think you're executing and you're not. And so they're very humbling. And as well, here's the best example is Silver Linings Playbook. Did the first preview of that, in Torrance or someplace, big high numbers, he who will not be mentioned because he's not with us anymore. He's the happiest Weinstein in creation, and he's like, oh, you got the film done, and we just knew there was a missed beat. You knew it, and then you read through the cards, and you'd see a couple questions about it, and so, I mean, without, like, the next day we went and changed a whole section, and there, you're changing the section of, the numbers are like, studio happy high, and so, you can't let that, you can't get like affected by that, oh, well, we've made success here, 300 people like it who've been recruited at the mall. So you
went back and made changes based on the test screen.
Like a big structural one. We realized, oh yeah, and and I actually, and we all kind of realized that the kind of little group of filmmakers, Bradley, David, the couple producers, the little group that was really involved in the cutting of the film, we all sort of, everybody felt it. I think I could articulate it quicker, and also I went and did a version of what the proposed fix might be. Like, so they came in the next morning and I said, you got to look at this. We need this. And they were all like, oh, yeah, And
so, did you test it again after
that? Oh,
yeah,
we had 6 more tests for a variety of reasons. I mean, the Weinstein Company was, he would test things like crazy. Mm-hmm. That company, they were smart with that, and they were very smart with the marketing.
Was Harvey ever in the editing room?
Once or twice, and I had worked with him a lot in the '90s, and so I'll just say we had no inkling of behavior that became his current problem. We didn't see, and Bradley had worked with him more recently and more intimately than I had on a film called Burnt, and he was like quite shocked. So anyway, not to get off.
No, but maybe you should arrest the women who worked with him, not the.
Yeah, that's true. We're the wrong people to ask. Mm.
Speaking of women, your profession is one where there is a fair number of female editors, certainly more so than among other professions, such as cinematography. But still, most editors are men. I'd say maybe, 75% of the major film editors. Do you think that's going to change? Are there more opportunities opening up for women?
I think so, and I think in the editing world it has been probably more embracing of women. Right from the beginning. You look at all through the history of films. I can't remember her name at MGM. The Terror woman who was the supervising editor for Goldwyn. I think that in the particular profession, probably because in the early days, because it was cutting and pasting, it was thought, well, women are good with sewing, so they'll probably be good with cutting. I think there was that kind of male prejudice that came to bear. But right now, I don't think women have tremendous opportunity in the editing world. I mean, you just look at the nominees last year, and it's thankfully, it's the because editing is the sort of the final rewrite. It's your merit is what's propelling your career.
Who are the editors who you admire the most? Whose work you admire?
Oh, I mean,
living or dead?
Still living. Walter Murch has always been, a real touchstone as an editor. And you go back to some of the things he did in the '70s, and then I look at the editor who did Days of Heaven for Terry Malick, Billy Weber, and it's just, I saw it recently at the Academy, and it's just, boy, that film stands up. I mean, it's even better than, in a lot of ways, than when it first came out. So there are, and then of people working today, there are almost too many to mention, because they're people I know, and there's because it's a profession, you are instantly sympathetic with the fact that, this is whatever they went through, that was probably not easy to get to what they got to. So, and you can kind of see the externals a little clearer.
Mm-hmm. What's the hardest part of your job?
I think you have to see the film a lot of times, and you have to, there's a certain discipline about how to look at the film when you're seeing material that that's sitting in your brain as a kind of a particular rhythm. You've seen it, and you have that rhythm kind of plunked in your brain, and then you're going to see it again, and you don't want to just get lazy and let the memory of that rhythm carry over the new screening of the film. So there's, I wish I knew, like, you could go off to a resort in Santa Fe and get your head cleaned out in some way to make every screening as fresh as the first one, but you just have to you just have to really apply a discipline to do that, and I also will fully admit to failing on many screenings. We'll have a screening and we'll have worked late, and you're tired, and you're not going to be looking at this film with any kind of freshness, and you kind of put a pin in your reaction to a particular thing and then return to it. But that can be hard.
Mm-hmm. You haven't done a lot of television work, have you?
I have not. I did it's the television is like changed so much since when I started, that I got asked to do the pilot of The Night Of, because I knew Steve Zalian, and it was a wonderful pilot, and it was initially HBO kind of said Gandolfini was going to star in it, and he died, so the project went on the shelf for a while, and then Steve picked it up and kept going and did the other 7 episodes, and I wasn't available to do them, but it was a wonderful experience, and there was no the way he approached it was no different than the way he would approach a movie, and in fact he approached the all 8 like one big movie, and but the climate, and I think our guests before helped, sort of bring that up. That the climate in television and the streaming services, it's a new world, and there's really interesting stuff being done, and more than any one of us can absorb. I mean, I can't keep up with, I miss too much of this one or that one, but when you do invest in one and it's good, it's just, rewards are wonderful. Mm-hmm. However, I will sympathize with our previous guest entirely when he said, you run the show, and then you look at it at home, and that's it. And like maybe you get a text from your friend, but it's not this. It's not an audience. And there's something about a screen and an audience, which in the equation of looking at movies, which, I don't think will go away, because I think it, as an experience, it's necessary for us as humans. The movies are like literature is storytelling, and it's like gather around the campfire, and I'll tell you about the story about today when we went out to kill the beasts for dinner tonight, and that's that kind of necessity of groups have to find their common experience and their common emotion is the movies. And so I don't worry that screening rooms will go away. Every 10 years or so they say, the theaters are going to go away. And they don't. And it's because audiences feel it. They may not be able to articulate it, but there are two aspects of it that I think are wonderful. One is the scale of the image, and I do believe you respond, physiologically differently than to smaller screens. And when you see a movie, and it certainly goes for the editorial process, the second you have another person in the room looking at what you are working on, the experience changes. And so when you get a whole room full of people, it really changes. We did a premiere of A Star is Born last Monday night, and we did it at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, because that's where Judy Garland had shot a big section for A Star is Born, and we had shot a big section of A Star is Born in the Shrine, and we thought, well, have the premiere in the venue that's the kind of has the history of A Star is Born. But there were 2,300 people in the audience, and they had it's not a movie theater, so they had to rig it for a big 70-foot screen. And I mean, it was remarkable. I mean, and the unintended consequence was that the laughter in scenes, like 4 or 5 more lines that were following, you just couldn't hear them. And there's a whole song at the very end where you just don't hear it because there's clapping and so you don't need to screen your film with 2,300 people very often. But I have to say, I've never attended a screening like that where you have that many people. And I suppose it would be similar to somebody who's a rock star who's playing on a small scale and then goes to a concert venue that's in a stadium or something. I mean, it's same kind of like, oh my God, what, and so just to kind of wrap it, it's the experience that you have here today and what this film festival is all about, I think is very valuable.
I want to turn it over to the audience for questions in a second, but just one quick last word from Jay. What advice do you give young people who ask you about getting into filmmaking, whether it's editorial work or anything else?
I told my kids, stay out of show business. Don't. And one, she went a different direction, and the other one went right in and came out of college, and 2 weeks later was working as an assistant at CAA. So I failed with her. So, but no, it is. I'm not the. I loved hearing what they were saying this morning, the scale on which Brent Hodges is making these films, that he has this idea and he goes and makes it, and if he gets to, if it starts making it, and if it really thinks it's going to be something that works, he continues and he finds the funding and gets it on Netflix and A&E and all this. You just think, that didn't exist 40 years ago. And you couldn't think that way. You'd say, like, even in the early 70s, I made a bunch of small documentaries myself, and you'd run them at like film festivals, but you knew that this was not a commercial product, nor would it ever be. And you better love it because you're paying for it, and it's going to be quite short because you don't have any money. So in many ways, though those obstacles are still there, some of the more artificial, mercantile obstacles aren't, and that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. I believe we have a couple of mics over there. So this lady first, she had her hand up first.
Thank you. Hi. I just wanted to ask you, take you right back to the beginning where you showed us the clip from A Star Is Born, because you must have chosen that clip for a reason. And I wondered what that was, and if you could talk us through why and how you made those choices.
I chose it because it was one of the few that Warner Brothers was willing to release before the film was distributed. But I chose it because it is a scene, that scene at the bar there where he touches her nose. And I said, well, at least I did that part of it. I certainly didn't do the end part, which is kind of where the voiceover goes over other selections from the movie. That was done by the marketing people. And I said, well, that's about the best piece. I think there were 4 they gave me a choice of. And that seemed to be the most solid. And I knew they hadn't cut it up because it's got the music, the Allman Brothers music. It's got you can't cut it up because it's got to line up with her nose.
Good choice. Over there.
Hi.
Is a mic coming your way?
Hi. I'm an indie filmmaker, so this is kind of probably more from the perspective of an independent filmmaker. Mm-hmm. Have you ever been brought into the pre-production phase, or would you, particularly if you're working with a director that's not as technologically experienced, would you see that as any kind of a benefit coming into the process very early on?
Benefit, always, and yes, I've done it, and in doing it right now, actually. So, yes,
but
always.
You can't mention the project you're working on, all right? Okay. Over there, the gentleman with the.
Hello. I'm a film production student, and I'm really interested in editing. So my question is, one of the most important things to while editing is determining the pacing of the story. So as an editor, you have to determine the cuts. So how do you come up with that decision? Are there some factors that you take into consideration to determine either to do a cut or not?
To do a cut or not to do a cut?
Yeah, like what are the factors that you determine to do a cut or not? I mean,
look, film editing is the best analogy that I can think of is to music and music composition. It's in that what really drives things are the rhythms within the structure of the piece that you're doing. So once you're there's the storytelling component, and then there's the rhythmic component that you're making a piece of music here, and sometimes the piece of music will say cut, and sometimes it won't. And the visualization of the particular moment will also help you guide you in that. But it does come back very much to a rhythmic analysis of the piece that's unfolding before you. And if your rhythm goes off, otherwise good material can really be affected in a not good way.
Gentleman over there, a blue shirt.
Thank you for being here today. If I remember well, I remember I read Walter Murch saying at some point that the first time he sees his element, like the rushes, that's when he keeps notes that are actually of a sentimental, how the audience will basically respond, because it's the very first time that he also watches the stuff, and then he goes on to look at it again and again and again, and do it technically. So my question is, how can you not at some point lose the perspective of this one time that the spectator will see something that you work on for months and months and months? Of course, this goes to the director as well, but I always wondered, you know, like a great editor, how do they not lose that kind of thing? Thank you.
You know, it's an excellent question. I sort of talked about it a little bit with screenings. It's a discipline, and I don't know quite how to answer it. I know that, as Walter Murch says, you know, your first responses to the material are often your best. But, you know, it's also context-driven. What you see and how you would respond to a particular daily will be different from how that same moment plays in the context of the cut film as you're telling the story. So the value in that is, which I applaud and apply to my own work, is that you do make those notes going in, if they're, and all the electronic machines here make it easier and easier to make those notes. And so and they're valuable, to go back to. I'll tell you one quick war story. Because of the scheduling on A Star Is Born, we had like extra time after we had previewed, but before we re-recorded, which is unusual, but because usually you're trying to make a deadline or whatever. But this situation was such because of the holidays and this and that. And we used the time to go back and look at the dailies, you know, which we hadn't looked at for 6 months, and look at takes that we didn't use and consider, you know, and in 2 cases we recut scenes entirely and put new performances in. And it sort of was a case of what you're saying is, you know, you had looked at the stuff again and again and again, and you were less and less receptive to it, and the context had driven things in a little different direction, so that when you went back and recut it from the takes you hadn't used, you know, it was kind of a revelation. And you know, it's not every film that you get to do that on, because time is always the gun to your head. But it was fortunate for us, and we took advantage of it.
I want to go to the very back of the room there.
Hi. Could you speak a little bit to, when you're doing the test screenings, the specific questions that you're using to really draw out those answers that are going to inform the new edit, rather than just, did you like the film?
You know, when you're doing sort of your own friends and family, that tends to be questions that you know, done in a kind of a personal one-to-one nature. When you get these recruited screenings, the studio is involved, and they're spending money on it. So they have a certain kind of a set of questioning that of a format that they often use that doesn't really vary much from film to film. And because what they're trying to do is get a statistic, you know, based on how many liked it, how many would recommend it, and they want to have some baseline kind of questions asked the same way from screening to screening. But where you find it is they're little, on those recruited screening things, there are blanks which ask the person to, do you have any thoughts about this or that? And people will write little essays, sometimes like very funny and wonderful, and sometimes like so mean that you just, you know, like, oh, you know, this is, and so I think it's there, and when you really get people to ask to, when people articulate things, and sometimes they're telling you something and they don't know they're telling you something, but if you kind of have it in your head about how it should play, and you hear what they are saying, you realize, oh, we didn't do it right. They're misreading it. You know, that idea of how people read a film and getting a film to the point where there's a a commonality to the experience for audiences is what we're trying to do.
We're completely out of time. I'm sorry, but I'm sure there's many more questions, but we have to wrap it up, I'm told. So I just want to thank Jay for
This is bad. I was going to show a film clip of something else, you know, you didn't. I didn't.
Too much information.
Too much talking.
Yeah.
I mean,
Anyway, thank you very
so
much, Jay, for sharing everything with us.